Continuing with the different types of connective tissue, let's look at adipose tissue. And adipose tissue is largely composed of cells called adipocytes. These are fat cells. Adipose tissue is also serviced by large numbers of blood vessels and is encapsulated or formed from reticular fibers as well as loose connective tissue of the areolar subtype. Fat is all about the storage and containment of body heat. It also is the primary storage component for triglycerides, our number one energy molecule. Remember, they store twice as much energy as carbohydrates or proteins. We also know that fat provides the cushioning for most of our body's organs and structures, as well as contributing to the body's contours. Fat is constantly recycled. The triglycerides are made anew again, stored for a while, but they're going to be broken down as well, so they don't just remain in the fat cells forever. And the amount of fat you have in your body can change over the term. You are pretty much about the time you hit puberty, around that time, you're going to establish pretty much the amount of fat you're going to have for the rest of your life, the number of cells. Now, these fat cells can either grow in size and you'll be a larger person with more fat, or they can shrink in size as fat deposits are used up. So the cells don't change number mostly. They can in emergency situations, but mostly they don't change numbers. They just grow or shrink in size. So there are two types of fat present. There's white fat. That's mostly in adults. It's not the good kind of fat to have. It's not very metabolically active. The metabolically active fat is brown fat that's found in infants and children, and it actually does generate heat and has tons of blood vessels that supply it, as well as lots of mitochondria to produce extra amounts of energy. So this is a picture of adipose tissue. You can see largely looks like popcorn, right? Covered with maybe cheddar cheese on the left, white cheddar cheese. On the right, looks like your normal popcorn. They do have organelles inside them. These cells do. The nuclei are largely shoved right up against the cell membrane, so they're not centrally located in adipocytes, and they're pushed right up against the membrane. Of course, most of the cell is going to be this lipid globule that has formed. Cartilage is our next major tissue type, and it's made from cells called chondroblast. So chondroblast are the cell types that make cartilage tissue. Once they have manufactured it, they're going to become chondrocytes. Now, what you have to imagine is that we're making this cartilage tissue. We're going to talk about exactly what the components are, but the cartilage tissue is being made and then the cell is finished, but it still has a little opening. It's like painting, into a corner in the room. Well, you're not going to paint all the way up to where your feet are. You're going to stop and leave a gap, and that's what's happened here. The cell's depositing the extracellular matrix of the cartilage tissue, and when it's done, it's going to leave a little opening. That opening that surrounds it is called a lacuna. Right? So when we talk about plural, it'll be lacunae. So now the chondroblast is done with its function of producing the matrix. It's now going to maintain it, and we're going to see these chondrocytes included in the lacunae. Now, the ground substance is getting much more firmer here. In fact, it's almost pretty much rubbery at this stage. There are no blood vessels or nerves in cartilage, so that's when you damage say your ACL or any cartilage in your body. It takes forever for it to repair, months upon months, because the necessary supplies for repair have to be delivered from the closest blood vessel, but they are not found within cartilage, nor are nerves. So when you damage this, it's not nerves that are directly attached to your cartilage that are providing pain information. It's surrounding tissue that is providing the pain information. There are three types of cartilage tissue. There is hyaline cartilage, elastic cartilage, and fibrocartilage. They each have their own unique characteristics and their own particular locations in the body. As we already discussed, chondroblasts produce the matrix, and it's the chondrocytes in the lacunae that maintain the matrix. So here is a particular picture of a hyaline cartilage. Let's look at it and figure out what are the distinctions here that which I'll be able to use to identify hyaline cartilage versus the other types of cartilage. First, we're in the location of the trachea, but hyaline cartilage is really noteworthy for its location in joints. And so hyaline cartilage has, you can see the cells, the darkened blobs, they're surrounded by a lighter area. That's the lacuna. So we have the cell itself surrounded by the lacunae. The entire cartilage structure is surrounded by something called the perichondrium. More about that in chapter 7. And the matrix itself that surrounds the cells is made up of a special type of collagen fiber that you can't discern at this level of magnification. So it appears fairly opaque. You don't see individual fibers here. So that's one hallmark to be able to identify hyaline cartilage. That's largely found in joints, but also the trachea and bronchi. Elastic cartilage is going to contain mostly elastic fibers that are going to be found in the matrix area. So we're going to have our usual chondrocytes, our lacunae, and the elastic fibers are going to appear as hairy structures, if you will. That's how I remember it. You got to figure out some way for you to remember it. So it appears as these hair-like fibers that are in between the cells. Elastic fibers found in your external ear. So you can twist it all up, all around, and it'll go right back to normal. And that's because of the presence of elastic cartilage. Finally, there's fibrocartilage, the third type. And fibrocartilage is most commonly found in the intervertebral disc, that cushion between the vertebrae in your spinal column. And you can see the presence here. This is the hardest one to tell apart from elastic cartilage. There'll be further pictures, but for me it's kind of like these cells are swimming through the ocean and they appear as fish, and that'll be really true for some of the pictures that you'll see in the face-to-face PowerPoint slides as well as in your APR. But certainly the hairy fibers are not quite as dense or as prevalent here as with the elastic cartilage. Notice in the elastic cartilage you see very dark fibrous structures in between the cells, but here not as much, not anywhere as much. Bone is our next major type of connective tissue, and bone is also known as osseous tissue. Just to kind of start getting you prepped for chapter 7, we're certainly going to go into bone in a lot more detail in chapter 7. The bone cells that produce the matrix of bone are called osteoblasts. Once they've produced the matrix, they become osteocytes. The osteocytes will be again included in cavities called, or in pits called lacunae. Osteocytes will be found surrounding a central canal in the bone where blood vessels and nerves propagate, as well as the cellular processes of osteocytes being found in little canals within the bone called canaliculi. These canaliculi provide a connection from one osteocyte in bone to another osteocyte. And when these osteocytes, their little cytoplasmic projections, actually make contact, there will be gap junctions there. So bone is actually a very, very dynamic organ in which the osteocytes do have the means to contact each other and communicate with each other. Bone is surrounded by a membrane called the periosteum. We'll talk again a lot more about it in chapter 7. I just want to show you some pictures here. There are two types of bone we'll be covering in Chapter 7. There's spongy bone, has lots of blood vessels surrounding it. And you can see it here. It doesn't have a real organized set of structures inside of it versus the other type of bone called compact bone. This is probably the pictures, if you have seen these pictures before, these are probably the ones you're most familiar with. We see in the big central picture, we see the central canals in black, and then surrounding them you can see the small flattened disc of black, those are the osteocytes. They're going to be maintaining the bone matrix. Lastly, we have blood, and I don't want to get into this too much. It's subject of a whole chapter in A&P 2. You've got several blood cell types. There's not really a ground substance here. The major claim to fame is, where is blood made? Why is it considered a connective tissue? Well, you have to look at where it's made. And it's made in the bones, right, in bone marrow. And so that's one big claim for being a connective tissue, as well as it transports, right? And we said that was a function of connective tissue as well, being a transporter. So while it doesn't strictly have a ground substance, it does have a bit of an extracellular matrix when it begins to clot. So very loose interpretation of what connective tissue is, but hey, it fits here better than any of the other three tissue types that are present.